This is the Kitchen Table War Story series, ground zero for the legendary tales of the mineral space.
So this was back in 2016, and we were buying minerals in the Permian Basin. So I get an email one day, and it comes in, and it's from an owner that says, "Hey, I'm interested in your offer. I've attached my revenue statements like you've asked for in your letter. Please let me know what you can offer." And then it says, "Sincerely, name, phone number." The first thing that I noticed is the name and the signature line. So I had to slow down and reading it, and almost like had to kind of say out loud to myself and pause on how to pronounce the name. I'd never seen a name like that before. Didn't recognize the area code. Click on the revenue statements, and it's from a well-known operator, but the owner name listed on the revenue statements was different than what was in the email. It was an entity out of Maryland. It was Baltimore, I believe. So I'm looking at this, and I find it odd just because it wasn't a 432 area code. It wasn't a Texas area code. It was a name that I'd never seen before, didn't know how to pronounce. The name was different than the revenue statements. And so I call the person because I'm just curious. And person answers. I can tell it's a man that answers the phone. And when he starts talking to me, the connections that are firing off in my head are interviews that I'd seen over the years. I'm a basketball fan, and just over the years, I'd seen interviews with like Hakeem Olajuwon and Dikembe Mutombo, and just a very, very distinct, unique accent. Not an accent that is something that you come across every day buying minerals in the Permian Basin. And so just started, asking him who he is, how long does he own the property, how did he get the property, what kind of offer is he looking to get, whatever. So he just tells me like super confidently, I bought these minerals a few years ago. I'm in real estate. I'm not wanting to take out a loan to purchase this new real estate investment opportunity that I have. I'm wanting to do it with cash. And so I'm looking to liquidate a portion of these minerals. So I'm like, okay, well, I've got your revenue statements. Let me do what we do, and I'll call you back in a few days, and I'll let you know what we can offer.
Do you think it's real? It's such a good property. You got to see it through, but you're intrigued, but you kind of think it's a joker. I mean, where are you at this point?
Whenever I first heard him start talking, you hear so many stories about these Nigerian prince scams and things like that. And so to recognize that accent and to be getting the email and seeing the revenue statements, like at first that was something that I thought, I was thinking it was just so unique. But by the end of the conversation, just the way that he was talking to me about it, he knew enough, and he knew what he wanted. He knew what he owned. And I could tell that he had read the letter that we had sent him. So I'm convinced that it's legitimate at this point. So I go online, and I'm on the county records. Everything is adding up. And so we get it evaluated, and I call him and make him an offer. And we end up coming to an agreement on price about a week later. So I sent him the purchase sale agreement. He tells me that he's going to have his attorney contact me, and I'll be discussing the terms of the agreement with the attorney. So his attorney emails me, and I noticed he had a name that was a little like the owner's. So get on a call with the attorney to start going through terms of the PSA. We're on the phone for a while one evening, and he tells me that the attorney tells me he's from Nigeria. Tells me that the owner's from Nigeria. And so I explained to him how unique this is. And I'm like, man, I just got to know, like, how does this happen? How does he end up with this super valuable mineral interest in Culberson County, Texas, which is middle of nowhere? So the attorney ends up telling me that, they both grew up in Nigeria, and that him and the owner were friends, and that he's the only attorney that he really trusts. And when they came to the United States, the owner got into real estate and was a smart guy, worked real hard, and had quite a bit of success. And so while they were growing up in Nigeria, the owner had always talked about wanting to own a big ranch, like you'd hear about in country music songs, like George Strait songs is something that we had talked about, and like you'd see in movies and things. He wanted to own a big ranch in the United States. So he does well in real estate, and he gets on eBay and buys like 90 acres out in West Texas.
Land on eBay, is that even a thing?
Man, that was the first time I'd heard of it. But he gets on eBay and he buys 90 acres out in Culberson County, Texas, and it doesn't realize that he's bought the mineral rights with it. So the attorney's walking me through this, and he's telling me that a couple years after he buys it, he's contacted by a company that wants to drill his minerals.
What wasn't the transaction on eBay? Wasn't that in itself a scam? Which is kind of the irony of it. Like, wasn't it misrepresented? Like, it had rivers and all sorts of stuff, and it was just desolate land in the middle of nowhere.
So I didn't hear from the owner or the attorney that that's what had happened, but somebody else down the road, a couple of years later, I'm talking about this, and they had told me that somebody had bought like 1,000 acres, and they had put pictures on eBay with like, Central Texas hill country type pictures, and they had divided it up and had sold these surface tracts to these owners. And I remember after hearing that story, I went in there and looked, and there's owners from all over the world, like Scotland, Australia, just
Right.
so he sells all right title interest to all these people that he's selling the land to on eBay. And then, a guy like this owner from Maryland buys a piece of property. A couple years later, oil and gas company drills a well out there, and it's a massive Delaware Basin Wolfcamp shale well. So it cash flows for a couple years with just like one well on it. And then about 8 years later, Katerra goes in there and drills 12 more wells on his property. He still owns in that unit. It's one of my most favorite stories, because to me, I'm like, he's like the personification of the American dream. It was a fun one to work.